Hey guys, Jay here. So I've searched so long for a preamplifier of this caliber, of this musicality at this price point. So I'm ready to tell you all about the Aric Audio's Motherlode XL tube preamplifier. This is a really good, high quality, truly high-end tube preamplifier that I got to play around with for a few months now, and it's such a good preamplifier. I can't wait to tell you all about it in this video. So first of all, Aric Audio. You probably haven't heard of Aric Audio before, and neither have I. I just came across them thanks to one of my Patreons recommending this preamplifier to me. Now, Aric Audio is a boutique small company, and they make their preamplifiers handmade, handcrafted here in the United States. Well, I'm in Canada, but it's made in the United States, and most of my viewers will most likely appreciate that fact. Now, as you can see, the Motherlode XL starts with two boxes. One is the power supply, and one is the actual preamplifier. And the two units are connected using this umbilical cord that comes with the unit. The power supply is compatible with 5U4, 5U4G, and 5U4GB rectifier tubes, and I'm currently using the 5U4GB tubes that came with the unit. And two of the tubes that you see on the side is the OD3 voltage regulating tubes, and the preamplifier uses two 6SN7 tubes. And the design goal with Aric Audio products, from my understanding, is to use the shortest signal path possible while using quality big parts where it matters. And once you open up the unit, you can see that firsthand. You see beefy, oversized transformers and parts where it's required. In the power supply, you see high quality parts such as the Clarity audio film capacitors, V-shaped wired wound resistors, and a high quality toroidal power transformer. And in the preamplifier, you see stuff like Takman carbon resistors, Jupiter copper foil coupling capacitors, tube damper plates to dampen the tubes, and finally the Cosmo remote controller, which is used in stuff like the ANK DAC, the Mentor DAC that I highly praised. And the attention to detail is phenomenal here. You see both chassis are lined inside with copper for shielding, and it is a fully transformer balanced inputs using Jensen transformers and fully transformer balanced outputs using EdCore transformers. These are all extremely high quality parts that you really don't even find in commercially available high-end audio components. It's very rare that I see like Jupiter capacitors and Takman carbon composite resistors and EdCore transformers. These are all components that are like essentially a dream for an audiophile to have in a preamplifier out of all things. And this preamplifier does have balanced inputs and outputs via the transformers. You get two balanced XLR inputs, two RCA inputs, which is quite a bit and enough to connect up to 4 sources. And personally, I ended up only using 2 of the input options, one for my analog turntable setup and one for my digital streamer setup with the Arender N20. But of course, if you have more, you can connect more. For example, if you have a CD player, you can connect the CD player to this as well, up to 4 sources. So that's plenty for most systems. So that's really good to see that they have plethora of input options. Now, as for the output, you only get 2, one balanced XLR output and one RCA single-ended output. Now, I personally used the XLR output to go to my Audion monoblocks from AGD, my reference Class D amplifiers. And then I used the RCA output to my Arendo 1S stacked subwoofers that you see here. Functionality and feature-wise, it's a very simple unit. On the back, you get a gain knob, which allows you to, kind of match the gain to the rest of your system. And then for the main volume control, you have the front knob with a simple display showcasing the volume adjustment. And then the other knob naturally selects and corresponds to the inputs 1 through 4. Now, because this is a handmade unit, you don't really get any indications to show you what input option you're on. You don't know if you're on 1, 2, 3, or 4. You kind of have to feel it out. But it does have a nice click to it. And once you get used to it, I mean, it's a pretty easy process. It took me about a week for me to get used to it, and once I got used to it, I memorized all the inputs and it was a fairly easy process from there on. Overall aesthetic and build quality is excellent. And the walnut finish is absolutely gorgeous and high quality in my opinion. You can really tell that this is handcrafted with care and attention. You know, if you play with products for a long time, like I have with the Aric Audio Pre-Amplifier, then you kind of feel as you use it, you know, the attention to detail and the care and the craftsmanship that goes into it, and you start to appreciate it more. And that was my experience with the Aric Audio. Once I started using it more and more, I was like, wow, this is really high quality. You know, they actually care about what they're building here. So I felt good about that personally, using the Aric Audio, that I was getting really high quality, someone who cares, that's building my preamplifier. And yeah, that's all I have to say about the build quality. I absolutely love it. But I mean, we all have different tastes. So if you're not a fan of walnut, they do have other finishes like maple. It's probably not a bad idea to contact them since they're a small brand. And Aric Audio, the owner, I talked to him and he's very passionate and he's willing to work with you to, you know, get the finishes that you want. He really cares about what's, you know, going to the customers. So I would definitely reach out if you have a specific finish in mind. I'm sure it's going to cost you additional amount, but this is like an heirloom quality preamplifier and you want to get a finish that you really like. So that's my advice if you don't like walnut or maple. But gorgeous. I love the walnut finish, personally speaking. Now, in terms of sound, first hooking up the Aric preamplifier to my system, I was a little bit taken back. I was a little bit underwhelmed for a $6,500 preamplifier, which is not inexpensive by any stretch of the imagination, but I'll explain in a minute why I think it's good value. But when I first actually hooked it up to my system, I was a little bit disappointed because the sound was a little bit thin than my personal liking. And also the soundstage was a little bit restricted for a tube preamplifier. But the good news is, after about 100 hours of burn-in and just, you know, running it in my system, I started to really feel that this preamplifier was opening up, not only in the soundstage, but in the bass. Overall tone started to be slightly warm, but not too warm. I feel like that it had just the right amount of warmth in the right place. Now, let me explain what that means. So this is going to be a little bit hard to explain, so let me kind of slow down here a little bit. So in terms of the low bass, so like the lowest octaves that you can hear, this preamplifier has a very uncanny kind of way of expressing that low bass. It's very authoritative. You feel the rumble, even on speakers that you don't expect that to happen. And we'll get to that in just a little bit. So the low bass is extremely textured, extremely profound in its way of presentation. It's really big scaled in a way, detailed kind of bass. And I never kind of express bass as detailed. I rarely do. But in this case, it's absolutely true. In the bass, you hear all the little textures in the low octaves. And it almost feels like I have my subwoofers on. But when I walk over to check if the subs are on, it's always off, because that's, you know, when I review things, when I review the preamplifier's capability, the speaker's capability, and so on, I turn the sub off. But I had to check multiple times. I checked the app, I checked the subwoofer itself to make sure that it was off. I even at one point unplugged the subwoofers because I couldn't believe the amount of authoritative low end and texture and detail in those textures that I was getting from this preamplifier in my system. Every single time I plug in this preamplifier, that is the first thing that I notice after that about 100-hour break-in. This quality not only made me rehear every music piece I love with newfound discovery of these textures and extensions, but even with many of the speakers I have heard like a zillion times before in so many different setups, like the Bacard S400 Mark II, I felt that I've never heard it extend so low with so much authority. And honestly, that's just one example of many that I experienced with many speakers that I personally thought I knew very well. But then this preamplifier gave a different twist, a different perspective on the bass capabilities possible with some of the speakers that I heard a zillion times, like the Bacard S400 Mark II. So I was very surprised by that, and that was the first thing that caught my attention. However, once you get to the mid bass, it's a little bit of a different story. So you still get that slight warmth and textures, but it's not as textured as the lowest bass. But instead, you get this sense of clarity in the bass. It's a little bit more cleaned up as you get to that mid bass. And actually the punch, the speed, and the dynamics is actually pretty respectable for a tube preamplifier. It is not as quick, tight, and fast as a solid state preamplifier, but for a tube preamplifier, it's very respectable. And that's what I mean when I say that the warmth is in the right places with this preamplifier, is that, in the lowest bass, you get this rich, textured, kind of presentation in spades. But when it comes to that mid bass, it's cleaned up a little bit. The speed and dynamics is respectable, and the definition and transparency is respectable. Whereas in some tube preamplifiers that sound really tubey, it may sound a little bit tubby or slow or a little bit exaggerated in that mid-bass region. This preamplifier doesn't do that. It's pretty balanced and it's pretty clean with slight warmth, and it's very inviting, but also a very good performance in that mid-bass region. Now, you're gonna see the same trend in the mid-range and high frequency as well, with warmth being in the right places. While the general kind of sound of this preamplifier is definitely on the warmer side of neutral, with focus on smoothness over the edges so that you don't get fatigued and can listen for long periods of time, you still get definition. It's not like tube preamplifiers where the imagery and the edges around the voices and instruments are hazy. And I know that some people like that and some people find that alluring, but the Motherlode XL takes a little bit of a different approach. With the Motherlode XL, it has a sense of clarity and incredible separation that lends itself to having this kind of definition around the instruments and voices in a way that is not offensive, but definitely easy to depict in the imagery. And this quality of great separation and imagery with this preamplifier allows you to hear busy tracks, like classical music, EDM, rock, even heavy metal. Those tracks that can get a little bit busy, especially at cranking loud volumes. This preamplifier is able to really separate even at higher volumes and place these instruments in the perfect positions within the soundstage, which is a quality that I absolutely love and really what defines this as a really good high-end preamplifier in my eyes. But of course, this is with reasonably recorded tracks, right? Reasonable to high quality tracks. When it comes to poor recordings, how does that do? Well, while it doesn't separate perfectly as it does with well-recorded or reasonably recorded music, it is still more separated with more clear, refined definition around vocals and instruments. And this quality to be a little bit more forgiving to poor recordings, as with most tube preamplifiers, really allowed me to explore and enjoy poor recordings that is nostalgic to me, that was passed down to me from my grandfather and my mother, as some of you may already know. I really treasure these music pieces because, again, they have nostalgic value to me, but they're poorly recorded and they're fairly old. And a tube preamplifier like this not really only kind of makes it withstandable, but really elevates the experience. I found that the poor recordings that I had, I never really heard it better. It's a really good experience that this preamplifier gives to poor recordings. Now, in terms of the soundstage, with virtually every speaker I have tried, it is pretty wide and pretty deep. It definitely opens up the system to a great soundstage width and depth. And definitely when it comes to preamplifiers, one of the first things that I look for is that holographic imagery, right? One of the reasons that people really need to experience a good tube preamplifier is that holographic imagery, in my opinion. It's like a revolutionary kind of experience when you hear that holographic imagery as if the singer is like right in front of you, that you just don't quite get with solid state amplifiers even at this price point. And this preamplifier has that in spades. The singer, the instruments, the body of the instruments, the pluck, the little breath that the singers take, I can hear all that in such a holographic, vivid imagery. And I know this may sound crazy, but when I close my eyes, it makes me feel like I'm like transported to a place of performance with no distractions, with my favorite singer and instruments being played right in front of me in my room. But it doesn't feel like my room. It just sounds so open and airy that it feels like I'm at a live venue. So it's a very good preamplifier that gives real illusion of real events, and I really love that. Play live recordings, oh my god, that is like out of this world. I absolutely love listening to live recordings with this preamplifier. It is absolutely astonishing. You know, a long time ago, one of my close friends told me a truly musical system transports you to the stage. And that's exactly what adding this preamplifier to my system did for me. So overall, this is a highly musical preamplifier, but also very good performance. And that is really what I was kind of shocked by. It's not just that this is a warm, luscious sounding preamplifier, but also a very good detail, very good transparency within the bass, mid-range, and high frequency, where the background is really quiet, it's inky black, and you can really kind of get lost in the holographic imagery and holographic soundstage that this preamplifier brings to the table. The only preamplifier that I would compare that I personally heard in my system that got really close and is very comparable, and honestly it's kind of very similar type of sound, is the ANK Mentor. Now it is a similarly priced kind of preamplifier, but of course the aesthetics is not there. I personally feel that the Aric Audio has better craftsmanship and kind of the aesthetic value here. And of course the Aric Audio uses, in my opinion, a little bit better parts like Jupiter capacitors, stuff that you really wouldn't see until you get to that top market. You see it all in this unit, Tachman resistors, clarity audio film capacitors. All of these are high quality parts that you can really tell the person that made and designed this preamplifier cares about the parts that's going into it and all the little things. So to me, yeah, $6,500 is a lot of money, but it's well worth it in my opinion. If you're gonna buy a $6,500 preamplifier because you have a high-end system and you really care about the musicality of your system, I would put my money towards something that I can see the value in. And from inside to the outside, the Aric Audio has proven again, at least for me, that it's worth that price point. Now, one other preamplifier that I want to compare is the Mcintosh C1100. And I want to make it very clear that this is not a side-by-side comparison that I did, but I did hear the C1100 at the retail store that I used to work at almost every single day while working there. So I'm very familiar with the sound, and it is one of my favorite preamplifiers from Mcintosh. And since it's their flagship, it has more detail and like really grand soundstage, more than what people give Mcintosh credit for. And that mid-bass kind of, a little bit exaggeration that you find in the Mcintosh house sound is there, but it's very well textured and it's a very beautiful, alluring sound that Mcintosh piece has. And for me, the Aric Audio is just way more musical. It straight up beats the Mcintosh in my personal opinion and personal taste, because it has, like I said, the warmth in the right places and has this clarity that to me straight up beats the Mcintosh C1100. And the C1100 is $12,000 if I remember correctly. And so that's almost double the price of the Aric Audio. But interestingly, at least in my opinion, from what I can see with my eyes, the Aric Audio has way better parts, way quality, more higher and more boutique parts than the Mcintosh C1100. So again, that's not a knock on Mcintosh. Mcintosh has their fan base, it has the aesthetics, the view meters, and all that kind of stuff. But from my experience, it just reminded me of the C1100 because it has a similar kind of quality and sound characteristic to it, but it's a little bit different in that it has more clarity, more separation, all these little audiophile qualities like nuance, the bass textures and ability to hear all those bass textures and the lowest bass, rumble and extra kind of almost sub bass added to the system. These kind of qualities that you just don't find with the C1100, but the overall tonal characteristic and that inviting kind of non-fatiguing sound really reminded me of the C1100. Again, this is not a knock on Mcintosh. They don't even sell the C1100 anymore. They have the C1200, which I have not heard. The only reason I'm comparing it to the C1100 is because I'm familiar with it. It is one of the best preamplifiers I've heard from Mcintosh while working at the store, and the Aric audio reminded me a lot of that sound, and I wanted to express that in this video from memory. So again, take that with a grain of salt. Probably a big grain of salt. So anyways, that was my experience with the Aric audio preamplifier. I'm trying to not get ahead of myself here and trying to kind of be calm here. But really, this preamplifier really gets me excited. I really love this preamplifier. The only preamplifier that comes close is the ANK Mentor that I have heard. And I'm trying to kind of see which one I want as my reference. So it's a very tough choice. I've heard them side by side and they sound very similar. They have each slightly different qualities that I will compare, but they're so slight. But aesthetically, the Aric audio clearly wins here, and I absolutely highly recommend for you to try this preamplifier if you get the chance. So with that, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope this video was helpful, and if it was, please click that like button. It helps me out greatly and it doesn't cost you anything. And make sure to subscribe as well so you don't miss the next episode, which, by the way, a little spoiler, next episode will most likely be that 100,000 special video that I've been planning for the entire month. So I'm very excited about it. Hope you don't miss that one. And so make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you guys on my next video. Until next time.